Sorry, I need some sound. We missed yesterday, and Abril and Amrita have just pointed out that the error continues today. The third session each day in the afternoon, all sessions. There are 3 sessions. Read the program as you obviously have been, because no one had picked it up before. The first panel or session is in the auditorium, the second one is conference room 1, and the third one is not in the auditorium, although the program says so, it's in conference room 2. And honestly, no one had picked it up till just...
That is an old version. That's we don't all have them. It is correct on the website.
Oh, sorry. Well, if you use the website, you would know, and it would be very clear. And never rely on out-of-date documents. Because there's always errors in them when they're working documents. Okay, so we don't have that problem at all. Are you ready to join us? Would you like to come down here? Take a seat, thank you. I'm absolutely thrilled to invite Wisal Ahmed to deliver the keynote this morning, and we've been so lucky to have her for the full period of the conference, and I know that many of you have spoken with her and engaged with her and enjoyed her company over this period. And I'm delighted that she's speaking on a topic that has been a sort of continuing festering sore around who determines what agenda and how for at least 40 decades. 40 decades? 40 years, 4 decades. It possibly was longer than that, but in terms of it being an international agenda since the late 70s and the famous Hoskin report. Wisal is from the Sudan and trained in medicine at the University of Nairobi. She then did a master's and a PhD in epidemiology and implementation science at the University of Washington in Seattle, and then nearly 10 years ago began to work at a regional and global level on female genital mutilation. That included a period in Geneva in WHO with the Human Reproduction Program, HRP as it was then, it's now Reproduction and Sexual Health Program. And then in 2023 moved from WHO to the UNFPA to work with the UNFPA on the elimination of female genital mutilation, and was based in Addis Ababa with UNFPA. She is now moving to Nairobi, and Nairobi is going to be the global centre for that component of activities of UNFPA rather than New York. Her work extends particularly in that field, but she has a much wider interest and scholarly and program policy experience across women's health issues, including around, of course, HIV and STIs, and around women's morbidity and mortality relating to reproduction and sexual health. So with no further comments, Wisal, we are so pleased you're here, and it's just been a delight to begin to get to know you, and so the floor is now yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Lenore, for your kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. And I wanted to first congratulate the organizers and the participants for a truly enriching experience, body, mind, and soul, so to speak. My presentation today aims to pique your interest and action to reworld and deconstruct and reconstruct the knowledge areas that we have now around the measurement on female genital mutilation. I'd like to first start with a recent event in the Gambia. A bit of a setting, a lay of the setting. 3/4 of Gambian girls and women have undergone FGM. And the population there is split between those who support FGM elimination and those who promote its continuation. An FGM law and ban was instated in 2015. 9 years later, 3 elderly women, and I'm sure you all read this piece on the story, were prosecuted because they performed FGM on 8 girls below the age of 8. This event cascaded into many. A prominent religious leader paid their fine and released them from jail. A lawmaker submitted a bill in the National Assembly calling for the repeal of the FGM ban, citing culture and religious freedom. And many players came to play, so to speak, in the Gambia and internationally. Until July this year, when the parliament, or rather the parliamentarians voted to retain the ban. I just wanted to share this event to highlight that FGM is not just a health issue. It is a socio-political issue too. So what is FGM? For those who've had a heavy breakfast and feel queasy, maybe you might need to close your eyes, but the World Health Organization defines female genital mutilation as the partial or total removal of tissue or other injuries to the external female genitalia for non-medical reasons. It's graded into 4, but I just wanted to focus, because it's really descriptive, I just wanted to focus to the most severe form where the labia majora is basically cut and sewn, leaving a small opening to allow for urine and menses to flow. Type 4 is really anything that falls under the spectrum of female genital mutilation that doesn't quite fit in the boxes of type 1 to type 3. So, naturally, with all this injury, women will have complications or suffer complications that are immediate, intermediate, or even lifelong, affecting the genitourinary system. So you'd have urinary, gynecological, obstetric complications, sexual complications, and mental health complications that are estimated to cost $1.4 billion per year. So how big is this problem? We estimate over 230 million girls and women between the ages 15 to 49 to be affected by female genital mutilation. And these numbers are generated mostly from the African continent, and the second largest contributor is the Asian continent. And the data where these numbers are generated concentrate along what they call the Sudanic belt that extends from the western coast of Africa to the eastern coast of Africa. The colors here indicate, just like traffic lights, the severity, or rather the burden, where the red is over 80% of girls and women affected by the practice. And you could see from the map on the right that it's not necessarily geographically distributed evenly within the countries. Some countries, you'd see different colors, like in Kenya, in Mali, you'd see the red, yellow, and green. FGM is performed by both traditional practitioners and health workers, what we call FGM medicalization. And the big contributors of FGM medicalization are Sudan, Egypt, and Indonesia. So what are the values and beliefs that drive practitioners to do FGM? There are several. It's explained by a right to perform religion, a cultural right for womanhood, a passage to womanhood, for purposes of retaining virginity or safeguarding chastity and fidelity after marriage, for purposes of beautification, marriageability. And health workers are involved because they do come from the same communities, so they hold the same beliefs. And some feel the pressure to fulfill the social demand. And of course, just like any other practitioner, there is a financial benefit to it, especially in health systems where health workers are underpaid. It's another incentive. There's also this belief that if a health worker performs it, and I have to highlight, health workers are not trained to perform FGM, that there is a risk, a lower risk of having complications. And there are, in some countries, no clear professional ethical laws to prohibit this, and hence their involvement. This is where we are with sort of the social norm conceptual framework when it comes to female genital mutilation. What you know and feel as a person is determined by your social network and what you perceive around you, what the community thinks should be done or what is right, or even the fear of those sanctions that could happen to you should you not go with the flow. Would my girl be married? Would she remain pure? These are sort of the norms that drive the feelings, the knowledge to practice, and what you do individually, you do as a community. And of course, we don't live in a bubble. There are contextual issues with the gatekeepers, the gender, the power dynamics that drive this practice. So this is what we have right now as our framework to change this social norm. Is it? Now, I just wanted to look more closely to what I've just shared with you right now, with the definitions, the types, and the burden, and hopefully make you question. So if we unpack the definition that the WHO has when it describes FGM, and definition really matters. It determines what is measured, it designs interventions, and it also directs the application of policies. So if we look closely into the definition of the WHO, it's really unclear what harm means or what injury means. For example, labia minora elongation is another genital modification or mutilation practice that is not included in the definition. And this is where girls between the ages of 8 to 14 are asked, or with the help of another person, to elongate manually with lubricants the labia for the sexual pleasure of theirs or the men. I think it's more for the men. And it has been shown to have health complications and mental health issues. And you could see from this map that where it is practiced is not where the data is generated. If you do remember, the data that I shared was basically along that belt. So we're really missing numbers from the sub-Saharan African region. Again, the definition of the external female genitalia, we know that female genital mutilation is not limited to the external genitalia. It does involve vaginal cutting and tightening. And this, again, is not in the definition. So what you don't measure, you do not count. And there is a growing practice of what is called aesthetic plastic genital surgery, which is which is happening, yes, in the African and Asian, but also in other continents. And the purpose or the driver is beautification too, which, as I've shown earlier, is one of the drivers of FGM. So that begs the question of what does FGM mean? And then it comes to the argument about age and consent. If you can perform FGM at an age of consent, can the women in Africa or Asia who decide to perform that be still regulated or persecuted for the practice they basically wanted? Another issue around typology is that it's not really biomedical. It's really just describing where the injury happened, and it's not very much. I would say it's futile. It's not very useful to sort of like try to cram in your brain. Somebody was talking about space. Do we even have space in our brain to do this? And these are sometimes required. Health workers are told, you have to remember this, and because this is how you would manage. But it has no relationship to management. So definition matters. Definition matters also for justice in FGM elimination. The same aesthetic genital surgery is blatantly promoted, unregulated in many places where this would not happen in a country where FGM law bans exist. I just wanted to just highlight here, there's also like justification for this that are quite, they're not science-based in that sense. They talk about it as an enhancement to sexual enjoyment, etc. So quite unregulated and non-science-based. So let's look a bit closer into the how in the measurement. The global estimates, or the numbers that I have shared with you, are really generated from population surveys from about a third of the countries that report FGM being performed. So we're really just, just having a small piece of that knowledge out there. We don't know the exact global estimate. And it is probably justified why only these numbers are taken, because they are population surveys and they're intentional and probably have a better picture of what the population is undergoing. Because elsewhere, there are estimates are based on questionable assumptions. There's this assumption that if an immigrant who comes from, for example, Sudan, would have the same risk, and her daughter would have probably the same risk as as from the country origin. So there is this assumption that people from their countries would have that same practice carried over to another country, and this is definitely questionable, and the evidence suggests and shows that the attitude and the practices of immigrating people kind of mirror the host country. So definitely some work needs to be done. And we also know that self-reporting is also an issue, because there is low reliability in defining the type. You wouldn't know any better. You wouldn't know what part of your body has been cut to even report on it. Or if it was done very much earlier in your life, you wouldn't recall that. So there are so many biases that could affect the measurement. So what about interventions? We've talked about the definition. What about the interventions? I just wanted to briefly talk about what we are doing right now. It's a joint program between 2 UN agencies that has been established since 2008, and the aim of this program is to accelerate change. You can't really effect change, but accelerate change by fostering collaboration using multifaceted approaches, involving several sectors to act together across all the levels, starting from local activists to community, to national and regional and global levels. And the interventions for the program and elsewhere have really focused on this conceptual framework, which is basically at the social support system, is to try to create a supportive system to detect, through surveillance, protect girls at risk, and those and access them to care, whether it's legal, social, health, have girls and women at the center to drive this social norm change, and involve and having movements to end FGM, representing the different players, not forgetting, of course, the gatekeepers, such as traditional and religious leaders, to be part of the change. And the governments, the duty bearers, through policies, strategies, and laws. So this has been the focus for probably the last 40 years or so in addressing FGM. And the measurements have been mostly around trying to see whether it changes attitudes, knowledge, and to some degree try to link this with the practice to some degree. What do we know about these interventions? We know that legislative interventions are promising only if combined and considered for local context. Interventions that involve health workers, has health education component, community engagement, social marketing, religious, public statements and declarations have been largely seen successful from both the quantitative and qualitative research that has been conducted in the last 20 years. And conversion of traditional practitioners have been shown not to be quite effective, similarly with alternative rites of passage. Now, the question is, are these interventions really successful? These studies have focused mainly in looking at the end point being a change in knowledge and attitude. And probably one study looked at how these interventions linked with FGM practice drop. So I'd say there's been a lot of kind of faith in this assumption that, if you change somebody's knowledge and attitude, they will ultimately change their practice. I wish the world was that simple. All my New Year's resolutions would be fulfilled if that was the case. So we again tried to explore and see whether that leap of faith does have a basis. So we looked at countries that have been projected to be able to eliminate FGM by 2030. Most of the countries are really off track. 7 countries seem to be on track that they'll be able to eliminate FGM in 6 years' time. But the majority of countries where we do have population survey data on FGM, 9 plus 13 is 22, need some help. They need some acceleration, and some are, the last category, are way off track. So we wanted to understand if there is any association, if the drop of FGM prevalence was associated with a change in attitude, a similar change in attitude. And guess what? We didn't quite see that. A drop in an attitudinal stand did not quite correlate with a drop in FGM prevalence. a change or a drop, or is it an increase, a decrease in gender inequality index was not associated. Again, this is one of the sort of the contextual explanations as to why FGM is performed, did not have any correlation with a drop in FGM prevalence, and so did a change in the girl education in countries. There was no correlation being seen. The duration of FGM ban was not, again, shown to have an effect, or I would say a correlation, you can't say an effect, an association with decrease in FGM prevalence. Interestingly, a change in life expectancy, which is really a composite score of education, living standards, health access. There seems to be something going on there. We also found that the change in attitudes among men and women were highly correlated. So that is kind of promising. They're not fighting amongst each other when it comes to the decision on abandoning FGM. And another interesting correlation, and again, this is really an exploratory analysis. We're still working on it, so it's really off the oven, as in like we're still, it's still cooking, but we found interestingly a positive correlation between the duration of FGM law and men believing it a religious requirement, meaning the more the years of FGM ban is there, the higher proportion of men who believe that it is a religious requirement. And this sort of takes you back to that story of the FGM in the Gambia, when the law was there for 9 years, and really, the law sometimes just stays as is, but it was enforced. When it was enforced, there was a reaction to it. There was a counter movement that was driven by religious and cultural movements to retain the practice. So this could explain that. Okay, so I'd like to just summarize by saying that the FGM burden, as we know it right now, the 230 million girls and women affected, might be an underestimate, just simply because maybe the definition that we are using right now is not comprehensive enough. We are not covering all the countries. We're not, the 92 countries. We're just looking at a third of them. The progress to eliminate FGM is mostly off track, and we really need to understand the why better. There is really very little knowledge on the linkages between interventions and FGM practice. We just basically stop at, this intervention works. It changes knowledge and attitude, and hooray, we were done. But no, more needs to be done. And the conceptual pathway that I have shown you here remains largely uninterrogated. So why am I here today? I'm very, I feel I'm honored to be with a group of scholars who are interested in rewording and constructing a knowledge base, and I feel you are the right audience to talk to, because there is a lot of learning and unlearning that we need to do when it comes to the definition of female genital mutilation, how we measure the burden, how we implement the interventions and the justice around it, who do we exclude. And the interventions need to be centered more around the individuals and the communities where this practice is done, with active listening and participation and co-conversation. And there is a lot of learning from indigenous movements. We know many communities that ended this practice, but little is known about what they did and how they did it. And I invite you to challenge and test this social norm pathway that we have right now and add more perspectives and understanding to it. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
You're welcome either to take questions standing up or sitting down. Thank you so much for an extraordinary presentation, actually, of how hard it is to change behaviour with so much effort behind it. I mean, I'm stunned by some of your figures and realising the extent of the work involved. I would love some questions. Yes. One there, and then Rita, sorry, I've forgotten your name. Can we have one this side, please? And while we're waiting for that, can you comment a bit more on migrants? Because Pascal Alati and I did some work on migration and the policing of women leaving country borders from Australia to home countries. And it seemed like, I mean, that really exercised the Australian government at the time, and I'm talking about the very early 2000s. But, you know, Australia was only one of many countries involved in supporting the eradication of FGM by essentially, I mean, we had one, just to elaborate, we had one research participant who said that it was so pervasive that she felt that whenever she walked into a medical surgery with a cold, with the need for a vaccination, she walked in with her vulva on her face. And the first question was, name, date of birth, have you had FGM?
Yeah.
And then they'd say, what's wrong? And you'd say, I have a sore throat.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, and this is exactly what I was trying to highlight, that the measurement and the definition matters, because it drives what policy is. If there is a directive that says, oh, anybody coming from Africa, from certain countries, or Asia from certain countries, they are at high risk of having, or their daughters are at risk of performing FGM, that sort of puts them in the radar, but there is so much that is sort of ignored in the literature, that they are actually at the same level of risk, just like any other Australian at the country level. So sometimes I feel the way it's defined without enough evidence, it brings about policies that could be quite unjust, that, as you said, are quite unnecessary at times.
Okay, yours.
I think, yeah. Hi, Dr. Wisal. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's really good to have all of this evidence and on one deck of slides. My name is Nana Abul Saud. I'm from Egypt, and I have a question and a small provocation for you. So I'll start off with a question. I wonder, do you think that the fact that marriageability is not being researched enough is one of the reasons why we have this gap glaring at us of like why some of the interventions are not giving us answer around, you know, like do people not know that FGM is not a good thing to do? Or is it that they know, but they still want to guarantee that their daughters will be married? Because it is a valid question to ask if mothers are oblivious to the pain they're inflicting on their daughters. And I'm using mothers just in reference to how I understand FGM in Egypt as, you know, one of the gatekeepers of this practice. That's one. The other thing that I wonder if we ventured out that way of understanding the role of health providers in sustaining this practice. Because if you look in Arabic news, for example, there is a lot of celebration of doctors correcting intersex babies in the Gulf and in Egypt. And it's in the same vein, we're asking doctors not to touch genitalia of kids because it is not a good practice. So I wonder if it would make sense for us on a global level to expand the definition of mutilation and link it to bodily autonomy and integrity. And if that would yield different, you know, like results. I'm trying to imagine a different, because we've been doing this for a really long time. I don't think people don't know that it's painful. I don't think people don't know, at least in Egypt. I don't think it is a matter of knowledge. It is a matter of the political economy attached to this practice. And it is a matter of the two conflicting messaging that we're sending as policymakers or on a policy level to health providers when it comes to FGM and when it comes to intersex correction. So yeah, I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Should I, or?
Yes,
Yeah,
go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so clearly, knowledge does not mean doing. And the conceptual, at least the good thing about this conceptual framework is that we do recognize what you know and feel is informed by so many things. The social desirability, if the community is going to judge my daughter and she will not get a husband, that would factor in my decision making. So I might know the health complications, but that could be outweighed with all the many other factors that I consider in my mind to make that final decision. So it's really an interplay of many things. But what is clear, at least we know, though we don't have much data, but we think we know that, is that the interventions have to be multifaceted. If I say health, it doesn't work. You need to sort of understand how the norms are shaped. If people say this is a religious right, maybe go into a discussion and have a conversation about that and see where you could meet. So there's so many components, and this is where it's really complex. It's not just, in settings where it is a marriageability criteria, there are many things around it. It's also a religious thing. There's so many things that need to be addressed at one go. Now, why we haven't been successful is not necessarily because we haven't been doing the right thing. Maybe we have been doing small aspects of the right thing in different sort of packages that don't work. This is one. So yes, I do agree. Yes, we cannot ignore that, and it has to be thought of in interventions. There is a lot of discussion talking about intersex in the definition on female genital mutilation, intersex male circumcision that is happening at the moment. And irrespective, I think, of how sometimes we define and bring terminology, they kind of go against us in a way. So, for example, in the FGM elimination efforts where you talk about bodily autonomy, and this is a really dangerous word, people come and say, okay, we're not going to do it for the child or that intersex person, and let them decide when they become 18 years old, and you have the right to do whatever you want to do, I guess. So it sort of opens another door. And it's a very challenging area. I don't have the answers, but there is a lot of discussion going on right now on how we can improve on this definition. And I think there will be an exercise in doing that. And I don't know if it will make it better, but we'll definitely, we're going to work on it.
Okay, we have a question. I'll take the one near Siri, and then there's one down at the very front, please, Amrita.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I'd like to hear your thoughts on, you've said, you've talked a lot about the importance of definition, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the debates that have been happening between feminists from the Global South and North around the politics of referring to these procedures as circumcision or mutilation. Why does it matter what we call these procedures? I'm thinking of there was a very interesting presentation yesterday afternoon where the speaker was talking about the politics of categorizing, right, and the ways in which African bodily and sexual practices often become pathologized, right, in ways that are harmful. So in thinking about decolonial praxis, what are the politics of naming these practices? And then just to piggyback off of what Lenore was mentioning, what are the implications, not just for patients, right, in global North contexts, right? So African or Middle Eastern women patients who go in to see medical providers and who are, automatically assumed to have undergone female genital circumcision or cutting or mutilation. What are the implications for African and Middle Eastern practitioners who may be, under surveillance, right, for performing such procedures in global North contexts?
Wow, that's a lot.
Do you want to take a second one as well and
Okay.
have two together in case there's some overlap? Rita?
Okay.
Yes.
You read my mind, Lenore.
Thank you, Dr. Wisal. Actually, Siri asked exactly what I was going to ask, but I do want to add something else to what has already been asked. So I was impressed by the way you presented it, and it was very revealing to get updated. But I was also struck by your choice of ignoring the C, and I was in the FGM/C that you had put in your PowerPoint, and here teaching at UCT for the past 15 years, I've had long debates with my young feminist colleagues and scholars about this, and as we all know that this conversation around FGM or circumcision has caused a lot of feminist tension. And we feminists don't have consensus on many things, and this is another one of those. And I wonder whether, given that we are trying to reworld out here, it's important to see how this conversation has unfolded in the past few decades, how there was a lot of horrific videos floating around, then the ban, then outcry from feminists in Africa that who are you to tell us what to do, then resorting to cultural relativism, again, the problem of that. So in some sense, we've done many things in the past decade beyond collecting data, and you point out to many of those nuances, which was very helpful. But now, when I connect it to the work that I'm doing, I see another kind of layer there, and the importance of having, I think what Siri is also suggesting, a North-South dialogue, as well as zooming in to various countries in Africa, because it's really important to have that specificity, but also zooming out and seeing what's happening in the past decade. For instance, in the United States, between 2012 and 2019, I believe there was a 280% increase in labiaplasty. So conversations around, is it okay to just zoom into countries in Africa, or do we gain something by also looking at, so what's happening with medicalization of these practices, of them moving across borders? The other thing that I'm learning is apparently it's another aspect of medical tourism. So medical tourism is something that or medical travel is something that I study quite in depth, and apparently Turkey, Mexico, Spain are becoming hubs for labiaplasty because they offer lower rates, but European standards. So there's a lot happening, and I think there's a need to do both, zoom in and zoom out and have this dialogue.
Okay.
Great.
You've got enough without me taking a third.
Yes. Let me start by ignoring the C. Okay, so I am a medical doctor by training, and I think I just have to put my positionality out here. I think the term circumcision is really imprecise when used to define female genital, if you may wish, modification, then mutilation. Circumcision in Latin is circum, read and size around, cut around the circumference of something. It's applicable and correct when it comes to the male genitalia. But for the practice of FGM, this is not what it is. You're not cutting around a circle, a cylindrical organ to remove tissue. So I choose that because of my medical training and because of its imprecision. Mutilation can be a very sensitive term to people because, as you mentioned, the naming, I don't know if it's called being barbaric about things, or may just sound just too much. But from a medical perspective, this is what is happening. You're mutilating something that is normal. You're making it or modifying it. That might be a gentler term, or maybe an acceptable term to use. The plasty, zooming in and zooming out. Sorry, I'll come back to your question. And this is exactly what I just wanted to highlight in the measurement aspect. We just seem to just zoom in and focus in the Asian and the African continent on what FGM means. But the scope and the definition talks about removal and cutting and injury that is done in the plastic world for whatever organ it is that is really unregulated, that needs more attention. And it brings some sort of like injustice and inequity, where when we want to discuss FGM, you'll just see the map of Africa and Asia highlighted, and it seems like the rest of the world is kind of cleared from what is actually happening. And these conversations and these discussions need to be brought to the table because, as I mentioned, this is now the definition that defines FGM. So we need to come to the table and redefine what FGM means. So do semantics matter? They do, depending on who the audience is. And I think it's really important to clarify the positionality, but at the same time, I almost feel it's almost futile. What would be acceptable to you would not be acceptable to another entity. There are some countries and some schools that insist to have the FGM/C, FGM, whatever it is called. At the end of the day, it is doing something that shouldn't be done to the external or the internal female genital organs. And I think, and kind of circling back to, is it Nahla or Nala? Nahla, okay. Yeah, cultural relativism is, it's also double-sworded in a sense, because, if this is taken as an argument, then it also sort of ignores the real, at least from my professional, the real harms the practice brings. And everything at the end of the day is relative. What is practiced right now in Indonesia, they call it a very small nick, a very small rub that is meaningless in any way according to them, but that could mean something very big to somebody else. So these are also the difficulties we have in defining what FGM is, what harm is, what injury is, what are the complications. There's so many nuances, so many practices to bring together. But it doesn't mean we will not find a solution, but at least some consensus that brings, all of us together, instead of just one side of knowledge determining what it is.
Yes, Andres, down the front, please. Oh, sorry, there's one there, is there? Okay, there and then down here. Thank you.
Thank you for the beautiful presentation. The question I want to ask is based on personal experience. I've personally come across people who have gone through FGM. And these people basically come from Islamic countries. In 2012, I came across a lady who was from Somalia. She told me her ordeal of going through FGM. And from your presentation, I can see that FGM is practiced predominantly in Islamic countries like Indonesia, Egypt. And is it by coincidence that FGM is predominantly practiced in these countries, in Muslim-dominated countries? And if it is by coincidence, I will understand. If it is not by coincidence, in the course of your research, have you found a reason why Muslims are subjected to this particular practice? Thank you.
We'll take both, even if they're very different.
Thank you again for this presentation. My question goes to evaluate the side of profit on the practice of this technique. And I compare it to the increase of C-sections, which are being more profitable for obstetricians rather than vaginal births, and therefore the increase of the procedure. I didn't know that trained health workers, doctors, were performing this. And it makes sense if it creates profit for them, if we consider this neoliberalization of health systems and the mercantilization of health. So I think it's very relevant to bring that into the conversation, which kind of, it's another dimension besides the religious or the cultural component of FGM, but also like the economic part of it, like what it's creating in the system and how we build systems that kind of enhances those kind of practices.
Did you want to do one too? We can have 3 questions. No? Okay. Yes, okay, that's one, and then we'll do 2 more later. There's one there and one there. But if you ask yours, and then we'll let Wisal answer before it's lost in memory.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Bahar. I'm a midwife and a researcher from the Netherlands. And I just wanted to add something to the conversation about terminology before, and I was wondering what your thoughts are. So should we call it circumcision or should we call it mutilation? And that one term is perhaps more kind and the other is not. And if you want to have everyone aboard, then maybe you should use the kind word. We have similar discussions in maternity care about terms like obstetric violence and obstetric racism, where the institution or the people in places of power say, we do not accept these terms, they are too harsh, and they feel like they're being attacked. And then they say, maybe we should not talk about obstetric violence, but call it respectful maternity care. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, a lot of, that term comes from a place, it has a history, it is rooted in the experiences of pregnant people and birthing people. And, but also what I see is by doing that, so some people say, yes, we should use respectful maternity care to get everyone in a conversation. But what you also see happening is that none of the parties feel heard. So the victims say, but we are not talking about respectful maternity care, and the people in power, they won't do anything about it because it's not that urgent anymore. So it just disappears. I hope I'm being clear in my question, but I'm wondering, won't it have a counter effect? If by trying to get everyone aboard, you actually lose the urgency of the matter by using not harsh words or not naming the problem as it is.
Okay, you have multiple questions. I'll let you answer, and then we'll pick up the one over there and the one over there, or 2 over there. Yeah.
For the first question, whether FGM is is related to religion. Yeah, maybe this map just illustrates where the focus of FGM is, and the center of Islam is Saudi Arabia. So there's no FGM there. So it's really interesting that this practice is linked to religion, but it seems to be more of a cultural practice that has been intertwined with religious teachings. And FGM is not only among Muslims, but also in other religions. But you are right, the more severer forms seem to be concentrated in Islamic majority countries, but clearly where Islam has been born does not seem to conflict with that sort of understanding. And this is where the struggle is, how to de-link FGM from it being a religious right. Indeed, FGM is for profit, not only for health workers, also for traditional practitioners. We also hear about stories in climate change and humanitarian settings where the traditional practitioner knocks on doors and say, hey, I give you half the price. Sort of like as an economic source of income, and this we cannot ignore and have to factor into why it's driving this practice. Using terms, again, semantics, kinder terms, using it for what it really is really double-edged. And I always say you have to use the term in the right place. I cannot go to my village and tell mothers, you are violent, you're violating to your daughters whom they love dearly and believe this is something they do for them. So language matters. If I walk into a community and insult to them, this is an insult because this is not how they view FGM. There is no dialogue. And for me, this norm is really a dialogue between two entities that have different values and just bringing it together. So naming it could be also harmful if you use it from a lens that is not necessarily aligned with another one. And for me, I work for the UN, and I know, this is the terminology we use. You're violating human rights, health, and these mean nothing. If I go to the community where their rights to health, to basic things, educations are not fulfilled, and then I come and say, whoa, now FGM is a violation of a right to many, many rights that have been violated. So I feel the language has to be used to the circumstance to be more effective.
Right. There were 3 hands, they've been waving. Sorry, now we've got more than 3, and I'm only going to take 3. I'm sorry. There was 1 up the back and there were 2 over there. Really quick questions because we're running out of time.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm Nirvana Pillai from Wits University. I just wanted to, maybe more comment, around something that feels too big for this, but I think needs to be factored into the conversation, which is really, more from a zooming out perspective, the deep-seated structural inequality. So we're talking about big things like power and gender and race and global south and north and stuff. And I just, I think that the kind of focus on the individual and the social norms and the community, even if we, go into specific contexts, I see that it's incredibly important. But the things that we're trying to kind of shift in terms of the political economy of decision-making, is deeply seated in those kind of structural inequalities. And it's just a comment to, you know, that I think that always has to play in, because for as long as people are making decisions based on the future, on marriageability, on their aspirations for their children, we can't not look at what those things are. So.
Okay, we have a question over there, sort of in the middle of the back.
Yes.
Is it still yes?
Yeah, I think somehow it has been answered, but because I think I've once met a person I was at university with defending what you're talking about, and it confused me, but she gave examples of why she was defending genital mutilation, and for her it made sense for women to actually do it. And she was even saying that even the sexual encounter, it makes it even better. So I was wondering, to what extent do you go and understand why people actually, why they do it without, because I'm thinking that if you ask me a question and I already feel that you have a particular position, I'll answer according to what I expect you want from me. So do you get into context where you actually are non-biased or not imposing anything, because people may feel demonized, and that maybe that could be some of the reasons that the interventions are not working. But if you come clean and as if you're not imposing anything, but trying to understand the context and getting into people's spaces, maybe it could have a different effect. Thank you.
All right. One more, but really quick, please, Lakshmi. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Actually, FGM also exists in India among certain communities, while government doesn't recognize or count. But what I want to actually say is when women from those communities come together, especially the educated women who have built the feminist consciousness in them and recognize that their bodily integrity is important, and they are going to the highest court in the country asking for change in this practice. However, because it's a minority group, there is a lot of difficulty moving forward. But whether it's Bangladesh or Pakistan, a lot of practices which are not acceptable for the religious order and the governments, it's women from the ground, grassroots, educated women who are pushing and knocking doors. So I feel, UN and governments alone cannot be moving these. So what is the attempt to build more grassroots movements against these kind of practices, and also have educated women looking at, who have themselves gone through the experience, contesting it and protesting against this. So it's also a matter of women's movement agenda. Thank you.
Okay, a very brief, because I think there's going to be lots of more conversations to have with Wisal, and we're going to stand on the steps and smile in a moment. So very quick response from you, Wisal, and then photographs.
Indeed, FGM, it happens in India, and as I mentioned, 92 countries that are not accounted for. We have 29 to 30 where we have data, so it's there. There are issues related to the structural inequality and the racial and the minority status that affect the decision making. But what is happening, and I do insist and emphasize the zoom in, because as she said, at grassroots level, this is where the change is happening. And this is where also there is support from this UN program to have movements to make that change. Again, change within communities have been done without the laws, all these big changes happening. They are happening, it's just that we need to investigate and learn more. Yes, there are social desirability issues in interventions, and the bottom line right now shows us that the practice still is going and going strong, and we need to improve on the methods and trying to understand why the interventions seem to not work. Thank you.
Would you join me, please, in thanking Wisal for her most wonderful, thank you so much. Okay, steps just outside for photograph, please. So quick pack up, and then you can go have coffee. But we really, really want the photograph first.